Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. So today, I'm probably going to do actually two videos today, because there's been something that's been kind of gnawing at me a little bit, and I want to do a video on it. But the video that I was planning on doing today is in honor of Spider-Man Day at Marvel. I'd like to do a breakdown and a stating of my favorite movie, Spider-Man. Now, I'm going to go over the major three. I'm not going to go into the Spider-Verse. This is going to be specifically live action Spider-Man performances. So we're going to have Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland. And I will go in order, and then at the end, I'll give who my favorite is, and the reasons why. Actually, that should be kind of self-explanatory at that point, but I'll give some of my reasons why. Now, let's start off with the first one, and what many people think arguably is the best one, and that is Tobey Maguire's original film adaptation of Spider-Man, which included Spider-Man from 2002, Spider-Man 2 from 2005, I believe it was 2005, and then Spider-Man 3 from 2007. Now, when Tobey Maguire came in and he was in that first Spider-Man movie, I don't think a lot of people really knew what to expect. There had been a lot of campy stuff with Spider-Man over the years. There was a TV show back in I think the 70s or the early 80s that was really cornbally. There he had appeared in off and on and some other stuff. Really, mainly a lot of people knew him from Spider-Man the animated series from the 90s. At least the people at that point, a lot of the kids that went and saw that movie, and I saw that movie when I was a kid. Um, and the thing that Tobey Maguire really brings to that role is he's very much an everyman, and an everyman is kind of it's a broad term that's used in to describe certain characters as he's the guy that kind of everybody can identify with. He's a high school nerd. He gets picked on. Nothing ever seems to go right. He likes this girl that is way out of his league. He just seems like the most. He seems like that outcast in high school, which is really what the original Steve Ditko comic adaptation of Spider-Man was. It was this really. It was meant to be kind of this identifier for teenagers at the time, where you get to see all of these things. But he had, your everyday teenager problems, and that's kind of what attracted a lot of young readers to him at the time in the early '60s. He had stuff like acne, he had girl problems, he had problems fitting in at school. Really the only constants in his life were Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And in that first Spider-Man movie, which I will say this about Sam Raimi's version of Spider-Man is he nails that original 1960s 1960s comic feel in this movie. It feels like he's jumping off the page in a lot of those scenes, and we go through in that first film, we go through the evolution of Spider-Man, and we see Tobey Maguire go from, this kid, and it's kind of great when he gets his powers because you get to kind of see him like, he gets bitten by the spider, and then he goes home and he passes out, and then he wakes up and he has muscle, he has all these muscles, and then he figures out in the Sam Raimi version he has organic webbing as opposed to web shooters, but figures out that he has all this web and stuff like that, and he can crawl and stuff on the walls and the ceiling, and a lot of Sam Raimi's stuff comes through in that. A lot of his experience and stuff with Evil Dead, especially with the special effects in that film. And, Spider-Man learning how to use his powers is actually pretty funny, too. I love the scene where he's trying to swing for the first time, and he realizes that, he's swinging on this crane, and he realizes that he can't stop, and he just hits this brick wall. And you can tell that it was a real stunt double, like, hitting a brick wall. It wasn't a CGI character, obviously, because it was 2002, even though there is CGI in this movie. And the other thing is that first movie put him up against one of his arch nemesis, which is the Green Goblin, which again we haven't really seen done very well, and Willem Dafoe does a very good job at that. And I like the interactions between Peter Parker and Norman Osborn because it's such a polar opposite, but they walk the same line, and that's what they want to make you feel. They want to make you feel like they're kind of the same person in a way, but Peter chose one path and Norman chose another, and it's so great to see, that that back and forth between the two of them, where Norman Osborn is kind of, that great line that he has is, "You're only the hero long enough, and you play the hero long enough until you become the villain, and it's great, great, great lines. And they do the whole, they do the stuff with Uncle Ben, where it's the great power comes great responsibility, and it just worked in that first movie, and everything clicked, and that's why that movie was a success. And then you go into the stuff with Spider-Man 2, where you get to see Tobey Maguire's character grow a lot. You see the personal turmoil, the fact that he's Spider-Man is wearing a lot on his life and stuff like that. That's really the main part of that, is his struggle with being Spider-Man and trying to lead this dual life while trying to balance out his own problems. And that's kind of the story of Spider-Man over the years, is balancing out all these normal personal issues with these other problems with the superhero life. And Spider-Man 2 does a really good job at portraying that with Tobey Maguire. And I love the way that Tobey Maguire, we haven't seen a better Peter Parker. Period. I will say that right now. We have never seen a better Peter Parker than what Tobey Maguire brought to screen. Because he was so believable in that role as Peter Parker. You believed that he was Peter Parker. Now, his Spider-Man needed some work, I will say that. I don't really like the one-liners that he has. He doesn't really have a lot of them to begin with. He has some in the first movie, but it's very sporadic. And then, as the series goes on, he really gets, he doesn't really get that comedic. There's not really a lot of, comic quips in Spider-Man 2, or 3 for that matter. And 3 is supposed to be kind of a dark and edgy one. And I have some issues with the way that he's portrayed in 3. Mostly it's, the finger snapping and going down the street, emo Spider-Man. That kind of killed that for me. I think that was a very bad aesthetic decision. And I think that ultimately damaged that character, which is why they chose not to continue with that film series. But when it comes to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, that really was the story arc. Is those first two films are so amazing, and Tobey Maguire does such a great job. And again, I will say we have never gotten a better Peter Parker. Now we're going to move on to the second on-screen Spider-Man, which is kind of the odd one out, if you will, which is Andrew Garfield from The Amazing Spider-Man 1 from 2012 and Amazing Spider-Man 2 from 2014. Now, here's the thing, is that the Amazing Spider-Man series is supposed to be more heavily based on the Ultimate line of comic books, which is reflected in the Spider Suit in Part 2. Now, as far as the aesthetics of Spider-Man in this, I don't really like the costume in the first film. I think it's, I understand, like, okay, he orders a wetsuit. They're trying to make it a bit more realistic, but at the same time, it's like, at least make him look like Spider-Man. He barely looks like Spider-Man in that movie, and I think it shows to an extent. The suit doesn't look. It looks like he's wearing like a really shitty rubber suit. I think the Raimi costume is a lot better and a lot more true to the comics than the Amazing Spider-Man 1. Now, they did improve on it in Part 2, and I like the Part 2 costume. I think it's relatively good. But as far as Garfield playing the part, he doesn't come off very much as your everyman. He's handsome. He's very handsome. He's a lot more physically attractive than Tobey Maguire was, or at least was portrayed as. So you look at him and you're like, you don't really believe so much that he's a social outcast. You really don't. I mean, you do the thing where they put on the glasses and all that, and it's like, okay, again, I'm still not buying it. I'm not buying half of this. And then you go into his relationship with Gwen Stacy. Again, we bypassed Mary Jane in this version, which is interesting. And Gwen Stacy, again, you've eliminated that issue where you had it in the first Spider-Man series, where Peter Parker's going after Mary Jane, and Mary Jane is supposed to be, this amazingly attractive, girl next door type. Gwen Stacy's, again, she's played by Emma Stone, but she is attractive. But the problem is that she feels like she's in his league again because he's more physically attractive than Tobey Maguire. So you've eliminated that problem of the believability. It's just, I don't think Andrew Garfield is as believable as Peter Parker in the comics was, or the Tobey Maguire version, which is why I say Tobey Maguire is probably the best Peter Parker we've gotten. Now, as for Garfield's Spider-Man, his Spider-Man is good. I actually enjoyed his Spider-Man. I think his portrayal of the character of Spider-Man, it just in terms of the when he's in the suit, is a bit better than Maguire because he can do the one-liners, especially in that first film. I love the scene where he's sitting in the back seat of the car as the guy's trying to steal the car, and he keeps pulling the door shut with the webs, and it's really funny. He sticks him to the wall and stuff. Again, the way that they write him in that film is actually fairly comedic, and it's good. It's not terrible. It's not cringy. In Amazing Spider-Man 2, there are a few little off scenes there, but for the most part, the humor at least stays somewhat intact. There's a few like goofy slapstick scenes at the beginning where he's juggling these vials of stuff in the back of this armored car, and it's kind of goofy. And again, that part is kind of like, okay, yeah, you're going a little bit into Three Stooges territory there. I feel like that scene was directed by Sam Raimi, but I do like his humor. I like his demeanor as Spider-Man. I think it works, and he has some legitimately good moments in both of those films. I think it's kind of hilarious where they do the scene in the second one where Jamie Foxx's Electro is blowing up all the Transformers, and it's actually playing the notes to Itsy Bitsy Spider, and Peter Parker makes a comment on it, which is really funny. I actually really like that scene. But again, there's some drawbacks. He's kind of the ugly duckling in terms of the Spider-Men that have been on screen, because he's not really. The thing is they were planning on setting up a huge series of films, a huge universe of films that was going to launch from Amazing Spider-Man 2, because Amazing Spider-Man 1 did relatively good numbers. And that did not happen because Amazing Spider-Man 2 underperformed, and they wound up scrapping the franchise, and then they went back and they worked out a deal with Marvel to put him in the MCU. So I think Andrew Garfield's the failure of those films is more along the lines of uh, is more or less along the lines of the films themselves as opposed to his performance. I think he can be a passable Peter Parker in certain ways and not in others, and but he was a relatively good Spider-Man. I enjoyed him when he was in the suit. Um, and also the supporting cast I felt was actually pretty good. You had, in the first film you had Martin Sheen, who came in as Uncle Ben, which, again, I thought that was a good thing to do because you needed to get those veteran actors. And Sally Field as Aunt May, I felt was a good choice, and I liked her relatively. I liked Martin Sheen actually a lot in that film. Um, and then you had some newer people coming in. You had Emma Stone, who was a known face. You had Dane DeHaan, who came in the second film. You had Jamie Foxx in the second film. Dennis Leary in the first movie, which is weird. I don't know why he keeps playing a New York person when he's from Boston. It's kind of weird to me. But you know, ultimately, I think he's kind of the ugly duckling. He's the middle child. He falls to number three. I think no matter what, and I think it's always going to be a duke out between Tom Holland and Tobey Maguire. And in saying that, now we move on to Tom Holland, who is our current Spider-Man, and he has been in Captain America. He debuted in Captain America Civil War. He had his first solo outing with Spider-Man Homecoming. He was in both Avengers Infinity War and to an extent, to a little bit of an extent, to an Avengers Endgame. And then he just recently had his second outing with Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, to review him so far, which I think he's going to get more appearances over the course of the MCU. We'll probably see him again in another couple of years in either another solo film or in an Avengers movie. But as far as Tom Holland's portrayal of Spider-Man, I think he's a good Peter Parker. I don't think he's as good as Tobey Maguire, but I think he is a good Peter Parker. And the reason why is he does that awkwardness very well. Now, I don't necessarily know if they should have given him glasses or something like that, even though it kind of wouldn't make a lot of sense because he already has his spider powers when we meet him. We don't really see his origin story like we do with Garfield and Maguire, which I think is a bit of a disservice to the character. I mean, I know we've seen it twice before, but I would still like to have seen that maybe in his solo film or something like that, a flashback or anything. But as far as what we see, the stuff, the way that he plays Peter Parker, I like. I think it's been updated a bit for a modern audience, which is fine. Again, it's not the same as the 2002 original, but looking at what he brings to the table, I think he does a very good job at it. Um, as far as him in the suit, I like him, but he doesn't quite have the humor down, but there's an explanation for that. The thing is that a lot of the other Spider-Man we've gotten, specifically the Maguire and really just the Maguire, um, we really don't in the original Raimi films. We don't see him very much in high school. He's in high school for probably the first half hour to 40 minutes of the first movie, and then then after that, there's a montage where he's been Spider-Man for a while, and now he's in college. And then the subsequent films are after he has graduated from college, so he's no longer there. Um, so there's a lot of kind of uh, I don't want to say skipping over because in those films there wasn't a lot to go over in those subsequent years, but we don't really see him a lot in high school. Now compare that to Garfield and Holland, where Holland has been in high school now for all of his appearances as Spider-Man, and Garfield, I believe, was in. I think in the second one he's in college or he's just leaving high school, but in the first one he's entirely in high school. So there's really a not they don't really get a lot of that high school stuff in those other ones, but I think Tom Holland does that very well. He can play a lot younger than he is, even though I think he's only like 22 or 23. But as he's in the suit, uh, the Spider-Man that's in the suit, we can see that he's learning how to do stuff. And again, it kind of takes the idea from that scene from Sam Raimi where Spider-Man's like testing out his powers and stuff, and he swings and hits the billboard on his web. But this takes it to a whole new level where we've gotten a little bit past that point, but he's still trying to get everything down. He doesn't understand completely how his spider sense works. He's not really that good at fighting. He has the reflexes and stuff like that, and he has somewhat of the acrobatics, and he knows how to do all this stuff. And he has the super strength and the durability and stuff, but he's still going through essentially those growing pains. So I give him a little bit of a pass on that, just because we haven't quite seen developed Spider-Man yet, and I really hope we see it with the next movie, because if they want to try and keep him in high school for another fucking movie, it's gonna be bad. Um, but I think he's good in terms of that. I think he's good as he's a believable Spider-Man who is on a learning curve. Let's put it that way. And I take that because they're in different places in each of those different universes. Sam Raimi, we go right from I know how to use my powers. I've hunted down the guy that killed my uncle, and then we jump forward after he's made the costume to now he's Spider-Man. And in the Garfield one, again, we kind of have a similar thing where he tests out his powers, and then we go and we find, and then he starts being Spider-Man. But he does have some growing pains in that first movie. But by the second one, he's pretty much the Spider-Man that we know. This, he's developed to a point now in Far From Home where he's more acrobatic, he's more graceful, he understands kind of how everything works now with his powers. So we're developing, but we're developing slow. Again, this is kind of what the MCU does, is it's a very long format type of thing. So I can't compare him as well to some of the other ones because they were much further along after a film or two than he is. But even saying that, I think Holland does a good Spider-Man. Like I said, the humor's not quite down, but there are narrative reasons behind that. Um, but it is still a bit of a drawback, especially for people that do like that part of Spider-Man's repertoire. Um, and then the supporting cast in the movies, in the Homecoming films, is terrible. The only ones that are good are the villains, because you have Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio and Michael Keaton as Vulture. And both of those characters are very, very well played by those actors, and they're well written. And really, Tom Holland and whoever the villain is in those films is who carries the movie. Because the other characters, Ned is, your standard annoying fat friend. Flash Thompson is just. He's He doesn't, the whole idea is that Flash Thompson's supposed to be this big jock. He gets all the girls and stuff like that. That's supposed to be the idea of Flash Thompson. Flash Thompson in this looks like a dork. Um, and again, you're messing up the dynamics that make things make more sense. If you make him the popular jock kid, or just the popular kid in general, and you make him seem popular instead of a gullible doofus that looks dumber than Peter Parker 90% of the time, then you add to that social alienation that Peter Parker has, and that's what makes it work. That's why Flash Thompson in the Raimi films worked. That's why some of the Flash Thompson stuff in Amazing Spider-Man worked, especially in that first film where he shows him up at the basketball game, or the one-on-one with the basketball. So, you know, overall, Holland has points for both, as opposed to the others who kind of lack in one scenario or the other. So, those are kind of my breakdowns of those three Spider-Men. Now, going into what my opinion of it is, my personal opinion on which one I like the most, like I kind of said during the explanation, it comes down to Tobey Maguire and Tom Holland. And while I'm eager to see where Tom Holland goes with his franchise, for personal reasons, I have to go with Tobey Maguire. And the thing is that it's one of those ideas when you go see a movie when you're a kid and it hits you in a certain way that no movie has ever kind of gotten to you in that way before, and you're like, you get goosebumps on your arms and the hair stands up on the back of your neck, that type of thing, where it's a strong, visceral, emotional response to a film. When I was in fifth grade, the first Spider-Man film came out, and my dad took me to see it on opening weekend. And I remember that I sat in that theater and I loved that movie so much. And then I got it on DVD not long after that, and I watched the living hell out of it. That is still my favorite Spider-Man movie to date, period. I know everybody says Spider-Man 2 is a better film, and objectively it is. Objectively it is a better film. But my personal favorite will always be that first Spider-Man from 2002. And it was a great film. The CGI has not 100% aged very well, but I can get past that because I really do love the film, and I love the acting, and by Willem Dafoe and Tobey Maguire and James Franco and Kirsten Dunst and everybody else that's in that movie. They all do an amazing job, and they bring that 1960s vision of Spider-Man to life. And really, Tobey Maguire is what makes that movie so great, because he plays the hell out of that character. And the only reason why I have to give it to him is for that, first and foremost, and because we've seen what we're going to get with Tobey Maguire, and he's made two of the two of the movies that he was in are some of the best Spider-Man movies we've ever had. As for Tom Holland, it's yet to be seen. He's going to play Spider-Man for years and years and years more. So we don't know where this is going to go. We don't know if he's going to be in a really amazing movie. My opinion on this could change over the years, at least from an objective standpoint. But for right now, it's got to be Tobey Maguire. He has to be the best Spider-Man, the best on-screen live-action Spider-Man. So that's my opinion on it. I want to know what your opinion is. Which Spider-Man do you like the most? And you don't need to give a reason or anything like that. If you like them more, then you like them more. But put your thoughts in the comments. Again, I like to read them. I like to know what you're thinking. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button. Subscribe. And remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?